Welcome back to Something You Can Do, a podcast for those hungry for action steps. I'm your host, KJ Kozak. Let's get into it. So, the topic of today's episode is something that sometimes is way too up in the clouds idea, pie in the sky, and sometimes way too prescriptive, concrete. And what I love about the interview that you're about to hear from Kelly Clark, founder of Learning and Creating, is that we really, I think, strike that middle ground where there's space for understanding what this looks like in real life, but without telling you what to do. Because while the podcast is something you can do, exploring things you can do, I'm not telling you your life. You can figure it out for yourself. So I hope that you enjoy this second episode with Kelly Clark as my guest. I hope that you find ways that you can apply it to your own life, and please let us know what works for you. I'm very excited to welcome back Kelly Clark of Learning and Creating. Kelly, what's something else you can do?
I am so glad you asked that question, KJ, and it's great to be back with you today. So I think the something you can do is building routines. I feel like in the world of optimizing all the things all the time, we forget how simply building some routines can really help us out in just tackling day to day life.
Mhm. And what does routine mean to you? What are you referring to when you say building routines?
That's the $1,000,000 question because there's this, is it a routine? Is it a habit? Is it a ritual? We're not even going to go with the Webster's dictionary, and people can take the word routine, define it in their own way. But for me, it's a pattern of behaviors or a sequence of actions, right? It's just things that you tend to do one after the next after the next. If this happens, then do that. So it's just however you wanna label that in your own, you know, thought process, right? Because there are people who have some very strong opinions. Is it a habit? Is it a ritual? Is it a routine? Or versus schedule even. And I just look at it as this thing happens, then the next thing happens, then the next thing happens. So whatever word everyone listening prescribes to that sort of a sequence of events, we're gonna build those.
Mhm. And why is this something that people might want to do?
For me, the number one reason and the thought that came to mind and thinking about, what's something you can do and sort of like, and why is it important? Building these routines just reduces the amount of decisions you have to make every day
Mhm.
because with a little practice, those routines just become second nature. It's something you do without even thinking about it. It just becomes a natural progression, kind of that muscle memory kicks in and, okay, I did this, now I'm going to do this. And so you've sort of like automating parts of your life in a way that there's just certain routines that you can follow. And so you can kind of do those on autopilot, which can gives you a lot of benefits, right? You can engage more with the people that you're with or focus more on things that do need your mental, and physical energies. But I really just think it reduces the number of decisions we're having to make in real time every day.
1000%. And there's so much research, like psychology research, that backs that too. Um, in terms of from so many different angles of, and I'm not even talking about the research that most people think of where it's like you have to do something s- 700 times. No, the habit formation stuff I'm less concerned about. But it's more the things like exactly what you're talking about, reducing that decision fatigue, creating that muscle memory, and also just making those like recognizable patterns, the schemas, if you will, the scripts that we're used to following. Like we can create those. It doesn't have to only be things like, you see other people do something and so that's what you have to do. No, the more that we do things, the more that our brain becomes wired essentially to recognize it and then to do those patterns. So I can't help myself jumping in with some of that. especially because in my own life, I've been working very hard to build
Mhm.
some routines. And I like that word that you've chosen because it does imply not only the actions you're taking, like not just the habits, but also the context and all the things that come around it. You know, my nighttime routine is not just like the habit of brushing my teeth and the habit of washing my face, but this sort of all of these things together with a purpose. Um, so, what are some of the steps involved in establishing a routine?
You know, I think that's the key part, right? Is those how do you establish them? How do you even get started? We can see that for both of us, practicing some routines, we see and feel the benefits in the end, but we have to get started, and we know that human nature, that's the toughest part, right? And so I would suggest start where things are the messiest, right? Where you may have the biggest impact, let's say. I know for me, building routines, really, I noticed myself doing it and using it as a tool when I had small people enter my life. Right. I learned very quickly, and this is maybe a little bit of like reference for listeners. I There was the very prescriptive, like a timeline kind of thing of you have to do this at this time, and then this many minutes later you do this. That was sort of the early 2000s landscape, and I had infants, um, and if you've ever had an infant, or a puppy, uh, there's there's not so much a schedule. You can't. It's 8:02. You were supposed to be asleep at 8 o'clock. Like, so you have to kind of go with the flow a little bit. And as a firstborn daughter, going with the flow was not my strong suit. And so this was sort of what helped me break away from that, right? So I wasn't focused on the clock as much as I was where are we in our day, right?
Mhm.
And so for me, the most beneficial was setting up kind of a when we get out of bed, what's next, kind of routine. And so I think really to your question of, what's the first step? The first step is recognizing where in your day to day might a routine help you be more efficient, right? Because I think that again, that saving that time, that mental, the mental load of making the decisions, looking at ways you can be just a little more efficient in one spot and then letting that carryover effect, be enjoyed the rest of the day and, as your days progress. So I think getting curious about like where might a routine, and again, this is that self-awareness, which is really hard to look yourself in the mirror at times and say, where do I need it the most? And I would say start there. Because if you need it the most, it is likely to have the biggest impact, which then will encourage you to do it more and more, right? That just kind of becomes that cycle of motivation happening. So I think, looking at where might a routine help? Um, and I found that, again, when I started paying attention to this practice, mornings with an infant and a toddler waking up, you go from like peace to none real fast. And so kind of having something in mind of how the morning would flow and what would serve me best, which I kind of thought of, and I didn't come up with this idea, but like what would future me
Mhm.
get out of it, right? If I do it this way, like where's the benefit for me? Because we don't want to do things that don't benefit us, And so for me at that time early on, when I started creating some routines, was I knew about when the babies would wake, and I knew I needed to back my wake up time by about 45 minutes to an hour before that,
Mhm.
which was really hard sometimes. But I knew if I got up, if I was able to, at that time, my routine, which we can talk about this part too, like they shift over seasons and times or whatever. But at that point, I got up, I took a shower. Like that was my wake up. That was just me. And because I knew from being curious and kind of paying attention to the way my days flowed, if I didn't do it then, it likely wasn't going to happen until very late that night. And
Yeah.
for me to be showered and clean to start my day gave me a boost. Right? If I
Mhm.
accomplished nothing else for myself that day, I had on clean clothes and I was clean. Like, and as a mom to little people, that was super important during that season of my life. Um, so really starting a routine, and that first step is just looking at where in your life, in your day to day, getting really curious about that. Like, where might there be a spot to start? And for some people, it might be the after work time. It might be the, like you mentioned earlier, an evening routine. We all might have a different space that we want to try to experiment with. Finding a spot that a routine might work, wherever you think is a great place to start. And I find that as you create that routine and kind of that becomes sort of that second nature, you sort of flow in that, then you can look at other places where another routine might help you.
Mhm. And as you start to craft a routine, how like, once you figured out sort of an area in your life, what are your thoughts or suggestions on picking the elements of that routine and figuring out what it looks like?
Oh, yes. A lot of experimentation. I wish I could say that it was as easy as saying, my routine is I'm going to get up an hour before the children, I'm going to take a shower, put on clean clothes, and be ready for my day. And that was it. Um, but there was, just I'll just keep using that as the example for now. It was, do I get up and shower and get dressed like I'm ready to leave the house? Or is it I'm just making sure I'm clean and I'm throwing back on some cozy clothes because we have a whole morning of little people and feeding and all of that kind of thing. So it maybe wasn't as concrete, but you can kind of experiment with it too, right? I think with any type of behavior change, with any type of um, new schedule, new routine, new whatever, try it out. I mean, try it out for a couple days and say, you know what, let's see how this goes. There has to be a little bit of that flexibility, a little bit of a growth mindset, and understanding there are days it's going to work well, and there are days that no routine is going to help you. Like that, it's just you may have made the best decisions, and the day had other plans. So
Mhm.
I think that trying to figure out what works for you in your kind of giving that kind of future self gift, like what would be most helpful for you in that space? And what can you accomplish in that step of your routine to provide you that future support? I did find after a little playing around with it, getting up and getting mostly dressed for the day set me up for success, so that I was ready to go when it was time to go do whatever was outside the house. Um,
Mhm.
I wasn't scrambling at the last minute. And so for me, that just helped me to feel more prepared, and I didn't have to worry about that later on. Didn't have to think about it. So a little bit of experimentation is going to be necessary. Trialing out a few ways to see, does this work? Does it not work? What elements are impacting it that maybe you can control, and maybe some things are just you're going to have to remain flexible to whatever the day holds.
This is helpful for me too. I think that this podcast is just turning into my own self-improvement sort of platform because so there were a lot of things from the interview I did with Dr. Janess Cates on sleep. And I brought a lot into my own life from that, especially consistent wake time, which I'm not great at. Also, going to my doctor and getting a sleep apnea diagnosis. But so because after all of that, I have started really reevaluating a morning routine because I would wake up in the morning and get stuck. And when you spend your whole life just being tired and not being able to get out of bed and never feeling rested, like this is a whole new world to me of like, oh, I can actually do things without spending all my energy like scraping myself out of bed.
Mhm.
And like it's taken a lot of experimentation, which is hard for me because I tend to be a little bit on the more rigid side, as everyone who knows me knows. And I want to come back to that shortly. But it took me a while of like, okay, well, I'm just going to try getting up at 6 a.m. every day and see what happens. And that was great, but then there were some other things. And then, I'm still tired because a CPAP machine isn't like a miracle fix. So it has become my new sort of benchmark is about an hour and a half before my first thing of the day is when I need to like get myself out of bed. And most days that's at about the same time, but then there are days where I can sleep in until like
Okay.
10 in the morning and still have that has completely changed my perspective. Like the day's not over. I'm just starting it a little bit later. And when I go through those same motions, instead of like, oh, I have to skip all of that,
Mhm.
because I know generally what helps me when I get out of bed in the morning. So that I think to and to make it specific for me, that has meant I get myself out of bed, I brush my teeth, I sit down at my computer and I journal in a digital thing, and then I go to the couch and I see what I feel like doing, and I'm drinking water in the middle of all of that, and then I get some food, and then I get dressed, and, like, having it as that list and having that little bit of, like, flexibility has been so helpful to me for, like you're saying, taking the guesswork out and taking the decision kind of stress out of, like, what my morning is gonna look like.
No, I mean, that's a fantastic example of how that the routine, it doesn't have to be rigid, but a general practice of I do these things in a certain order to support myself. I mean, that which is a fantastic point to bring up. Our bodies and our brains like to know what's coming next. We are whether we like it or not, we are wired that way. And in areas of day-to-day life where you can introduce that predictability, I personally believe it allows us then to be more spontaneous and flexible in those instances where that's either what's called for or, we get the phone call from a friend that says, "Hey, I'm in the area. Want to grab a cup of coffee?" Or, "Oh, I got tickets to this. Are you available tonight?" It's not going to unravel every bit of your life because there are pieces of it that are this happens in this kind of way. This stuff happens around this sort of rhythm, and so we have those moments where we can flex outside of it, or we can say, "You know what? I don't have anything on Friday morning. I can turn the alarm off." And we can give ourselves that space to flex and go with the flow, which is as another very a reformed rigid thinker, perhaps, or reforming. Maybe I'm still it's a day to day thing, but that can be helpful too in allowing you to bend to the things you want to do and need to do as those change. Yeah.
I think too, it's helpful when we think about neurodivergence and all of the many different ways that people process information and structure and routine. Um, and so I'm curious if you have thoughts for people um, that have felt some type of way about routines or that have struggled with that. Um, what might be helpful?
Oh, that's a great question. And something, I'm thinking about time that I spent in the classroom working with, you know, 35 kids of different, I mean, 35 unique human beings, right? But everybody has their preferences. Everyone has their, the way they're wired. I mean, it's all over the place. I think the biggest thing, and I know some people are maybe, well, I won't say cringe, but might be like, what? If you feel resistant to this idea and you're like, routine, no way, no way. What about the routine? What about the idea of it is so off-putting? Identify that thing, right? Because again, there's some general practices around forming routines, but there's no hard and fast rules. From my experience, a lot of people are resistant because what they are being told or instructed is a routine is is a schedule or it is a script or it has been forced upon them versus something that they have developed as a structural support for their own life, or if they have had a voice in, right? Small children, for example, they may not be able to build the routine themselves, but where you have those options, if there's an either or, you know, giving those choices and allowing for some flexibility in it, which all of us, wherever in the scale of, brain wiring we may fall, we all want that autonomy. We all want to be able to choose, what works best for us in that moment, whenever practical, right? In the classroom, I had some students who simply did not want to sit in their chair. Now, as a
Mhm.
general practice in a classroom, is a chair probably the safest and best place for a student to be? Yes. Are there times when it's necessary? Yes. But are there really actually times where it is absolutely not necessary at all? There sure are. And so, giving a student a choice when that choice is truly an option versus saying, this is when this really does need to happen because of these constraints and communicating that. But I think if you're an adult human and you're like, routines, like, no, I don't want to hear it, ask yourself why. My guess is that you've been told there was a certain way you had to do it that was very prescriptive and didn't take into account the things that work for you or the things that motivate you, or really had nothing to do with you. They were just the way it should be, right? I, for example, you said that you get out of bed and you go brush your teeth. That thought to me is absolutely crazy. Okay, now, which is funny, right? And we could probably do a whole podcast on this. Okay,
Mhm.
because if I got out of bed, to be honest, if I got out of bed, I don't think it's a bad idea to brush your teeth. Don't get me wrong. I think brushing your teeth is a very important thing. If I got out of bed and brushed my teeth, I, because of my own personal quirks, would not be able to eat or drink anything until the flavor of that toothpaste is completely gone from my mouth and
Mhm.
my lips because it generally makes my lips burn. That's a whole like, so for me, if you were like, well, here's our routine. So we get up and we brush our teeth and then we go and do, I'd be like, I do not like this routine. Right.
Mhm.
Now, again, let's just say that this is where our plans, diverge. If you're like, okay, here are the things that need to happen before we start our workday, put them in the order that makes the most sense for you. That mine would be brush teeth, grab work bag, go out the door. Because I've already
Mhm.
had my coffee, I've already had my breakfast, and then I would brush my teeth. Now, obviously, is that different if I'm at a hotel or a conference or I'm doing other things? Yep, I have to adapt those days because I need to brush my teeth before I leave my hotel room. Really.
Yeah.
Um, so just the, we've made our own example there of how two good routines, but if we switched, we could get through it probably,
Mhm.
but it wouldn't be optimal for us, both for what we're comfortable with, what we're used to, and just our personal preferences of how we like to go about doing things. Um, yeah, but I think if there's real resistance to it, if you're working with someone else, whether it's a colleague, a partner, a child, whatever, um, get curious about where is that resistance coming from. Um, and my guess is that those feelings are based on somebody else telling you how you have to do something versus being able to build something that meets the needs, but also suits your personal preferences.
I also have worked as a coach with a lot of, like, late diagnosed ADHD folks that are very scared by the commitment involved in
Huh.
even doing a routine once. And that's something I think to your point when you kind of expand it and open it up and making it when you make it more about personal preference
Huh.
and about, again, reducing decision fatigue, which I've used this phrase a couple of times, but really just refers to the cognitive load or how much we're making our brain work when we have choices. Our
Mhm.
brain loves novelty, but doesn't love choices. And so when we take
Mhm.
choices out of the mix, this is why Steve Jobs famously wore the same outfit every single day because he was taking that was never a decision that was on his mind. He was using his brain power for other things, inventing the iPhone. I don't know. Um, but I think that when we think about it that way, I think there are a lot of places where people are already leaning into routines really heavily. And I also think that for a lot of neurodivergent folks, especially in the kind of ADHD world, there's this feeling of like relying on routines as well to kind of get you through the day. Like, oh, if I didn't have this structure, then my life would completely fall apart. And I think I really love the framework that you're providing where it is much more kind of values based and needs based and driven by your priorities instead of like, oh, well, if you take away my alarms, there's nothing left. Which I know some people that kind of feel that way.
Well, the part of it is too, we think routine, and for especially for folks who are, I have some folks in my inner circle who are definitely in the ADHD realm, and also ADHD plus very creative, right? We'll just add in like that whole flavor of, kind of the way that they approach things. And so, you hear the word routine. And again, this could be the like, oh, well, I don't want to be held back. I don't want to be tied down. I don't want to have to follow X, Y, or Z. And the reality is, most of us, like you said, we have routines that we're already doing, but because they're things that we have done over and over again, we don't even think about them, right? Like if I were to ask somebody, these, you know, when do you put your glasses on, right? I know I turn off my alarm in the morning if it's going off. Most of the time, I tend to, if I stay on a good schedule, I'm up a little bit ahead of it. But the alarm goes if I turn off the alarm and I put my glasses on my face. But would have to stop and think, when do I? Oh, of course, that's when, because it's just something I do. So there already are those places where we do that. And the nice thing about the routine is that it can kind of flex with what your commitments are, with what is the flow of the day. Is it a work day? Is it a weekend? Are you on vacation? They're not hard and fast rules, but ways that you don't have to think about some pieces and
Mhm.
the decisions, right? I mean, the routines. I Here's another option. Just throwing this out there, routines. I know that there are things that I could do for myself. I have the intelligence, I have the training, I have the capabilities to do that I choose not to, that I outsource. One of those is my workout plan. I used to do it all myself. I do not anymore. There are experts who are way better at it than me, and all I have to do is open it up and follow what it says. And
Mhm.
I realized that doing that for me has made me more consistent in my frequency of working out because I'm not even thinking about what it is. Like my biggest decision is, do I need my running shoes on or can I wear just lifting shoes? Like that's the big decision. And really that doesn't even matter all that much. But I can just open it and I just follow
Mhm.
whatever they tell me to do, that's what I do. And I don't have the resistance because I'm like, oh, well, I could do this or I could do that. I'm not trying to optimize something. I just follow what that routine says. And I can still make those changes in the moment that I might need to adapt to whatever's going on, right? You know, I wasn't doing downward dog yesterday because I had a pretty bad headache. Having my head down was not a great, things. I can adapt, stick to the routine, and just adapt that part.
And I think that this gets into another useful area of this as a thing you can do, which is routines outside of like morning and evening. So I love that
Mhm.
you brought in the example of your workout. Do you have other like examples of where people might look for routines or where places that might be ripe for exploring a new routine?
I think if there are things that are taking up a considerable amount of your time that are perhaps something someone else has the expertise in, if you have the ability to either, consult with them or like I do, like I pay the trainer to do that piece for me, that gives me back the time to focus on other things. So I think anywhere in life where that is, you know, meal services, I know for a lot of people that meal planning part, or even just honestly, I love grocery delivery. I think that it is one of the best things to have. I was spoiled by it when we lived overseas, because it was a very normal thing. At that point, it was not yet where we had been living in the States. I think that the pandemic really brought that to more areas than had ever had it before. Um, that's a time saver, but it's also a routine
Mhm.
of, okay, on, Monday afternoon or whatever it is, I need to fill out that order. So I know that those staples are arriving every Monday evening or Tuesday, whatever it is, right? Or the, boxed meal services or, things like that, where you can also make the decision once and not
Mhm.
have to make it repeatedly. Um, our our dogs are very particular about the types of bones and treats that they like.
Mhm.
And so we just have those set up, that particular type to be delivered every month. I don't have to think about it. They come home and there's a box. So
Yep.
that's another, another piece. Things like you mentioned Steve Jobs and the wardrobe piece. I think that those are things too. If there's a particular area of your life that is causing you more just mental drama
Mhm.
and just sucking time, valuable time from you, I think that's where I would look for, is there someone else who can do this for me? Like, can it be delegated? Maybe within a family, there's something that can be delegated. Is it a service that I might be able to, work into the budget to pay for? Or is it something that's readily available that allows me to kind of save the time at a place? I Another just everyday example, I love putting books on hold at the library
Mhm.
because I know if I go in with the idea, I'm gonna go find a book to read, an hour and a half later,
Mhm.
I mean, I've had a great time. I could go up and down the aisles and look at all the new like, and there are days when that's worth it to me. But there are times when I know that, like, "Oh, I've got books to return. Let me just, put books on hold or go pick them up." And I can walk in, I look for my name, I grab them, I check them out, and I walk back out of the library.
Yep.
So again, it's maybe doesn't fit the full definition of a routine, but it's a piece of life that I can reduce my time invested, and I can reduce that mental energy that I'm putting toward that in that moment, so that I have my book to enjoy as a part of my unwind routine at night, that's important to me, to have.
Mhm.
Um, I think the other piece with routines and trying to set them up or figuring out where you might be able to kind of source something is also looking at things that happen concurrently or that can happen concurrently in your life. And this gets into the testy topic, like multitasking versus concurrent. But because multitasking, I'm not a, there's a, that's a whole other conversation that we could probably get into.
Mhm.
But looking at, are there things in your life that can happen at the same time that you naturally can start to put together? Um, I love using laundry as that example because it has
Mhm.
to happen. But I know that there are other things that I can do that make sense for those things to happen together. So I've kind of built the routine of I can put the load of laundry in while I'm starting cooking dinner, because when I'm done cooking dinner, that load is ready to go in the dryer. We sit down to eat, the dryer can be going. And then after dinner, before going to bed, I can fold that laundry to stay on top of it. Now, that's just a small example, but that's one that works for me. And I often think, oh, I need to go put something in the wash when I get ready to start cooking dinner, because I'm in that habit of that's the time in the day where I can do that so that I am not finding laundry 3 days later still in the washer or thinking I started it and didn't, all of those things that we run into. So looking at places where maybe there's things that fit together, um, sitting at lessons or practices for kids can be some time that might, you maybe can't do some things, but I did a lot of reading of research articles during grad school while sitting waiting
Mhm.
for ballet lessons or piano lessons or taekwondo or whatever it was. So looking for those pockets where maybe you can build a routine into that space. Um, walking and listening to a podcast. Places where there's some activities that might be able to fill that same spot, and you gain some efficiencies in that way, where when that's finished, you're like, I've actually completed 2 things.
Okay, so now let's talk about rigidity. So, like, for those of us that have trouble, like, breaking our streaks on things or, like, really struggle with a little bit of that, like, treating your day like jazz and just sort of flowing through it, um, what can be helpful to people who are building routines but really worried about kinda getting stuck?
I would say in the building routines, go small to start. Not everything needs to be sequenced and put into a routine, right? The idea about these routines is, yes, there are some that can help you out through your day. I do find in working with clients that most benefit from that beginning of the day type of routine, kind of the getting up and going and getting, initiated into the day. And then that wind down routine, right? The end of the day and what does that look like? Those are the spots where a lot of us either really hard to get going or everything goes off the rails by the end of the day, right? So those are maybe spots to start. But I would say don't overload yourself with the idea that it has to follow the routine, or that it has to be all of the time either. The idea is that the routine should serve you and your future self. It's not your job to feed the routine. If it's not working, it's like a bad book. If it's not working, stop. Just stop and evaluate.
I'm famously terrible at that. I have a friend who literally is like makes sure that I don't read or watch things that I don't like because I will commit myself to finishing it. Yeah,
It's me last
you
night.
too.
Well, and I'm okay with saying like I don't this book like I had one 2 weeks ago. I was like, no. I read a few pages. I was like, no. But this other one, I was curious enough. I'm like, how is this going to end?
You
Because
have
it
to
was
know.
I wanted to know, and then I got to the end and I was like, that's it, meh. Like it just yeah. But I think also too knowing the difference. Am I curious enough to see will this work, or is this making things harder? And so here's the thing: things can be hard but beneficial, or they can just be hard.
Mhm.
Right? When it's new, it may not feel natural. It's going to maybe feel you may have a little resistance to it. Um, but but at the same time, if you are finding yourself like you are tied to it and you can't function outside of that routine, maybe there could be other things going on. But it might be that you've created more of a schedule too than a routine.
Mhm.
And again, I would think if you're finding yourself holding so tightly to it, ask yourself why. Like, what is it about this that, because it could be that you're sticking to it because you know it really does help you, but maybe it's become too prescriptive. So maybe you need to just ease back on it a little bit. Or it might be that you're holding on to it because if you keep doing that thing, you're not having to think about, all the other stuff. Um, and it so there's a lot of reasons, but if it's feeling too rigid or you're feeling yourself too tied to it that you can't like step back and say, well, today it's no big deal. I can pause what I have. I would just say the thing that I remind people of too is the point of the routine isn't sticking to it 100% of the time. It's having that as your kind of your baseline to sort of bounce back to, right? If my normal morning routine, like yesterday, uh, you know, gets thrown off for whatever reason because I get a really early phone call or something, and then I wind up in the office and I'm on my computer, and then all of a sudden I go, "Oh my gosh, I need to be in the office," like in the office. um,
Mhm.
I can recover from that. It's not like the whole day isn't over with. I can all right, well, now I'm going to stop this and I'll go do that. Um, but if it's feeling like it's not serving you, then I would reevaluate the routine. And that not serving could be that you're not getting the results you were hoping for out of it, or you're not feeling like it's really helping, perhaps, or maybe you're becoming too tied to it. Um, and if it's not feeling comfortable, then look at it and see where might a small change, help you with that. Because it should be something that's allowing you to get through that period of the day a little more efficiently, without that kind of, mental fatigue happening.
Right. And I really appreciate this point of the routine as a baseline, and it's not a checkbox to be checked off. It is a guide for what you do and how you spend your time to help you not spend time deciding how to spend your time, or to help you towards other goals. But I think that, even in that case where if, I know for me, a lot of the routines that I've worked to set up are because I had specific goals around taking care of myself and
Mhm.
spending less time on tasks that didn't need to happen and more time resting or, um, things like that.
Right, and I think that does everyone need routines? No. Do we probably all have them and we don't even think of them in that way? Yes, we probably do. There are probably things that we do that are naturally the way we do things for a while. But I think it's also worth looking at, as we talked about in the previous, podcast, that, what season, like what's going on in your life right now and what are your goals, right? Because I can tell you some of the routines that I have built in the last 3 months, 4 months are different than they were 6 months ago because what my goals were or the things that I wanted to prioritize required me to shift sort of the way that I use my hours of the day and the way that I use the energy, and capacity that I have. And so I've adjusted some of those things. Will they stay that way? Maybe. Or I may find myself too, if you find yourself sliding out of the routine a lot, maybe that doesn't need to be the routine anymore. Maybe there's room, for a shift. Maybe your work schedule has changed and you don't have to get up at 6 in the morning, and so you've naturally fallen into the waking up at 8. Following the routine too is, your adherence, I should say, to the routine should be a neutral measure. It's just a a set of skills that have been put together, a pattern of behavior that serves you in that moment. And if it doesn't serve you or if things have shifted, then you can shift it too. It's meant, like I said, it's meant to help you um, do the things you want to do, have the time for all of the things that you need to do, um, build your day the way that it best suits you.
Mhm. And I'm so glad that you brought seasons into this because I know this is the sort of overarching theme of this 3-episode guest series is honoring seasons, recognizing
Mhm.
seasons of your life. Um, and that resonates hard with me because especially like thinking about the example of exercise, like my exercise and workout routines have changed drastically throughout my adult life in particular around surgeries, right? I had an
Mhm.
abdominal surgery that completely changed how I was able to exercise. I had bunion surgery, so I was like on the couch for several months.
Uh-huh.
And I mean, I think of myself just now as getting back into a lot of habits and routines that I'd had
Uh-huh.
before then because it completely changed. I mean, everything. When you are stuck with your foot elevated for like 6 to 8 weeks, like that interrupts a lot of things. It was interesting to see kind of like what's left, when you take away all of those other pieces. So, what other thoughts or suggestions do you have for folks to honor the season they're in by using routines?
It is true, and I went through a period of, the year I turned 50, 2 very major surgeries that I had not anticipated happening and spent a long time in very limited motion, a lot of recovery needing to happen to where I'm now, I'm almost 2 years beyond that. Just getting back to a place where I feel like I've been able to get back into those routines, um, that I know make me feel my best, in a lot of ways. I think thinking about the seasons and kind of knowing what do you need during that time, what's going to give you the most peace? What's going to make you feel your best self? And this can be across a whole host of things, right? It could be, important that you're getting enough rest, or maybe it's that you need to get out and be with people, and whatever is important and will make you your best self. Build some small routines around that, right? Around that, whatever that value is, that goal is that you have, and start small. That's the other piece too, because again, as we move into the holiday season, and then everyone's setting, New Year's resolutions, and I'm gonna change my whole life. Um, you know, and our bodies freak out. Our brains freak out when we do that. It's not, we can adapt, but we adapt better if we can start small and build the practices, into our day to day. You didn't go from bunion surgery and foot elevated for 6 to 8 weeks to being like, and I'm going to go walk 4 miles every day. Like that doesn't make sense. And very often the things we set ourselves up to do or aspire to do really are not reasonable. We can get there. I have enormous confidence in the capacity of the human body and brain to do wonderful things, but we need to allow it to build up that stamina to it. And the same is true with the routines, right? If you're starting, I know for, again, children, quite frankly, adults, and a wind down sleep routine. You don't go through all the steps and have a great night's sleep the first night. It's start with the one thing. Okay, at, 2 hours before bedtime, I'm going to put my phone away, or whatever. Whatever the steps are, just start with one and then layer them on. Add them on over the course of a week or 10 days or whatever it is. Have a little bit of a process, that will just make it become more natural as you move through it, but also understanding that it's going to look different in those different seasons. I mean, right now, with the, getting close to the time change, the end of October, it's getting darker earlier here on the, Northeast. And that definitely, that impacts a lot of things in a lot of different ways. I am personally one of the weird people who I love when it gets dark earlier. I love the darker mornings. I know I'm weird. I
That's
get it.
so weird. That's like upsetting, but
I
okay.
actually really, well, see, I've realized though, by being curious, and this occurred to me, if I figured it out when we lived overseas. We lived in the UK for a number of years, and um, so it's staying light until 10 or 11 at night, and then sunrise
Mhm.
happening at 4 in the morning. Um, I was a mess. The light really impacted my sleep a lot, and I struggled hard. Like it was very, very difficult for me.
Wow.
I understood what people with seasonal affective disorder deal with in the wintertime. I had like the reverse of it. It was
Mhm.
really, really hard for me. But because I realized that my body does really well with seeing the sunrise and seeing the sunset, like having dark in between. Um, so no, I'm not saying, I mean, yes, last night I was like, how is it only 6:15 and it's already dark outside? Um, but we don't realize it, but what do we do? We turn on the lights. We light a candle. We enjoy that time by the fire, right? So there's some things that if it was summertime and 6:45 at night, I would not be sitting, in my house cozied up with warm tea and a book, enjoying the fireplace. Um, because that just wouldn't be happening. It would never be hot and, all of the things. But in this season, I can enjoy that part of the routine. And it looks different than it does in the summertime when we're waiting until 8:30, 9 o'clock at night to walk the dogs because it's finally cool enough. So, like, if I
Mhm.
look at November Kelly or end of October Kelly and July Kelly, those schedules are very different in that same period of time. But that's where that routine sort of shifts with the literal season. But also, dealing with work schedules and, parts like that. So looking at, what's being okay with saying, you know what, this is not serving me anymore. This isn't
Mhm.
working. I think for whatever reason, we feel like we need to stick with something rather than say, how can I change this to make it work better? How can I allow it, to work better for me? And again, I think we have a lot of great ideas coming at us with, this is the way to do this or to optimize. And I think we can, but I don't think what optimizes a schedule for KJ is what optimizes a schedule for Kelly. They can both be
No, we're learning
fantastic,
that.
right? Yes.
We're
Um,
very different.
we're very, very different in a lot of ways, right? And so, and that's then when you add in like that dynamic, right, of family and partners, roommates, whatever, it can be difficult in that sense if the routines or things or the needs within those routines are different, which is where the communication piece, definitely comes in with, talking about, where they may intersect in a good way and where they may clash in other ways, which is an interesting conversation I have with a lot of college students. Um, Roommate issues
Yep.
as freshmen. It's a big topic of conversation with some of my clients. Um, so yeah, but just looking at what do you need? And I think that really, again, getting curious about that and understanding, what would make things better for me right now and what would make things better for my future self. Right. Because in the moment, we might be like, oh, I'll stay up late. I really want to finish reading this book. And then a quick like, but you know what? I do have to get up in the morning because I have an 8 o'clock meeting and I need to be fresh for that. We can make those decisions then. But understanding what's necessary in that time is a good thing to keep in mind too.
And when you have structure to your life such that you know that you're gonna have more time to read that book, it makes it easier to put it down and come back to it later than if you're kind of constantly running or if you have no routine or structure and so no guarantee that you'll get to do the things that you like to do. I think that's another positive of having routines is that at some point it might be in a week, but you're going to have that space to do the things that you want to be doing.
Oh, absolutely. I think that the routines, in the places where they fit can definitely, they open up some opportunity and some space because you've created some efficiencies in some other areas. And there's some predictability to it as well. Whether that, I mean, for like, I have a friend and I know that their family every Friday night is homemade pizza. No
Mhm.
one ever asks the question, what is for dinner on Friday night? You just
Right.
no, it hasn't changed in 18 years. It's not going to now. Like that's the routine, right? And so I think when things are a little bit more predictable, um, it just makes it that much easier. We're not wondering, oh my gosh, what if, or oh I have to, I'm unprepared for this. Which whether some people are like, oh I don't need it, I'm fine, but we also don't realize what's running kind of in the background of our brains and then within our whole bodies when all of that is just kind of cycling back there. So anything we can do to reduce that can allow us too to be more present in the time, in whatever task, whatever environment we're in at that time, we can really be invested there, knowing that then this stuff can happen at that next bit of time.
Absolutely. So, you have shared so much wisdom and helpful ideas about building routines. And so I'm curious if you have any last thoughts or suggestions for listeners that are considering building a routine as something they can do.
I would just encourage people to examine if there are parts of the day or the week, parts of their, kind of day-to-day goings on that are causing them consistent um, stress, anxiety, frustration, or just not flowing real well. Get curious about whether a routine or coming up with some kind of a repeatable process might help that period of time be a little bit more efficient and a little less taxing on their body and brain. Um, I think that there's probably some room there for them to, you know, set a routine. It's something you can do to make your day go a little better.
I love it. Well, thank you so much, Kelly, for being my first repeat guest. And I'm really excited to round out this 3-episode series on seasons um, with another interview.
I look forward to it. Thanks so much for having me back.
This has been another episode of Something You Can Do. I hope that you liked it. I worked really hard on it. And if you'd like to reward that, like, share, subscribe, leave a 5-star review, send it to a friend. If you didn't like it, there'll be another episode in a couple weeks, so please just hang tight for that. As always, this podcast is something you can do. The thing might not work for you for whatever reason, and that's okay. Hope that this was fun for entertainment purposes anyway. If you want to reach out to us, you can find us at Something You Can Do Pod on Instagram or sycdpodcast@gmail.com. Hope to hear from you soon. And again, we'll see you again in a couple weeks.